All right, welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. Another Tuesday, baby, and you know what that means. It's time for a new set of the college football playoff rankings. And look, we got a lot to digest tonight. We will get the new set of rankings here in just a few minutes, reacting live to them with you. Can't put them up on the screen, copyright reasons, but we'll be watching them live with you from home, giving you an immediate analysis. And then we're going to bring in our friend of the program, College Football Encyclopedia. Connor Hibbett's going to be joining us tonight to give us his reactions. We're going to break it down with you over the course of the next hour or so. And, of course, taking all your questions and comments in the chat. It's going to be a really fun night. One of our last live streams that we'll have for a little while. If you're subscribers to our newsletter, you know why that is. If you're not, you'll find out on Friday. So we'll keep you updated over these next couple of weeks. But regardless, we are so glad that all of you could join us today, whether you're watching now, whether you're watching later, whether you come in and out. We're very grateful for all of you and glad you could be here, not just for this live stream, but part of our channel, part of our GE Nation, something that we're building here on YouTube. Scotty B, the Baylor King, good to see you. Robert, Alex TV, good to see you. Brandon Schrader, good to have you in the chat. Called in a few weeks ago, but nice to have you back in the chat and finally making a live stream again with us. Hope everything's going well. And Rutgers, man, big win on the road against Maryland this last week. Good for you guys. And Jerry, good to see you, Jerry. Another massive win for your team, the Orange, man. Syracuse taking care of business in Cal and probably going to take care of business against UConn. That's 8 wins at the least for Syracuse. Could push for 9. They pull off an upset over Miami. But regardless, what a year for Fran Brown in his first season. Not just with Syracuse, but the first year as a head coach. Can't really top that. So good to have every single one of you here. We're going to get our banner going across the ticker here. Of course, all of the information there. Make sure to like the stream. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Make sure to check out our expert picks down in the description below. We've got our new holiday special there as well, which gives you all of our bowl picks, all the NFL playoff picks, and a month's worth of the NFL regular season. All that stuff can be found down in the description. We just need 16 more signups, as you can see, to reach our goal of 100 expert pick subscribers. And I really believe we can hit that. We've still got a lot of time left, a lot of football left to be played, a lot more left to be done. So I think we can get there. But go check it out. If you are interested, we'd love to have you. It'll be one of the best decisions you make this year. And it's enough to get you some good Christmas money as we head into the holidays. Holiday special for a reason. So what I want to do before we get into the college football playoff ranking show, which again, we'll be airing here in just a few minutes, and we'll be giving you our live reactions and thoughts as those rankings come through. And of course, we'll bring in Connor Hibbett to kind of give his take as well. Want to share a little bit of insight onto what happened in week 12. You know, we haven't been able to do some of these recap videos as of late. Life kind of getting in the way of that. But I kind of want to talk about what we saw and how it could impact what we see tonight when the committee releases their week 13 rankings. I think the biggest questions that a lot of us will have is, where do Tennessee and BYU fall? The losses that each of them took was different, but the cases for both of them is different as well. They're not equal, right? Tennessee took their second loss of the year. Granted, this second loss was on the road to a very good Georgia team, a top 12 Georgia team. BYU, though, taking their first loss of the season, and it coming at home at the hands of a 3-6 Kansas team, but a Kansas team that is much better than that record shows. A Kansas team that upset Iowa State the week before that. So I'm interested to see two teams that were in the top 10, where are they going to fall? Inevitably, they should fall, it's a key word, fall out of the top 10, but how far? Do they keep Tennessee and BYU in the college football playoff field? Are they right on the outside looking in? Keep in mind, you know, both these teams still have a path to their conference championship game, BYU more so than Tennessee. So all the Cougars really have to do is take care of business, win the conference championship, and they're in. Easier said than done, though, considering this next week they've got a game on the road at Arizona State, who is very, very hot right now. The Sun Devils are not out of the Big 12 title race. They should find themselves ranked tonight. We had Arizona State ranked 21st in our GE Top 25 that we put out just the other day. Actually, yesterday, right here on the channel. So where's Arizona State in there? Really, the Big 12 as a whole is something that we want to watch out for tonight. This is more than likely going to be a one-bid conference, and that bid's going to go to the conference champion. But who is it going to be? Is it going to be Colorado? How high do the Buffaloes rise tonight? Is it going to be BYU, who was the favorite for a very long time, maybe still is for some? Could it be Arizona State, who could slip in there? We know it's not going to be Iowa State. We know it's not going to be Kansas State, who just got demolished by Arizona State at home in Manhattan, which was a bit of a surprise for all of us. So that's one of the things I'm really interested to look out for. Tennessee, on the other hand, like we just mentioned, takes their second loss of the year. They got a bad loss against Arkansas and then the 14-point loss to Georgia, where they jumped out to a 10-0 lead and then got outscored, 31-7 the rest of the way. How far do the Volunteers fall? Do they still believe them to be a playoff contender if they win out? There are only 2 games left, are against UTEP and Vanderbilt. If Tennessee fails to make the SEC championship game, which is a very good possibility that they will not make it, would the committee put in a 2-loss Tennessee team ahead of, maybe a 2-loss BYU if BYU loses their conference championship game, ahead of an SMU if SMU fails to win their conference championship? So that's where these things get interesting. Seeing where these teams are ranked tonight gives us an insight into how they view these teams and how they value these teams, maybe if they didn't have a conference championship, if they didn't get that automatic bid. This is why this is a big deal. This is why these rankings are a big deal. So those are 2 things I want to watch for there. I don't think we'll see much of a change in the top 6, top 5 or 6. Oregon should remain at number 1. Ohio State should remain at number 2. Texas will be up there at number 3. Penn State 4. Notre Dame 5 for me. I've got Notre Dame at 5. A lot of people have them a little bit lower. But the Fighting Irish continuing to take care of business, have a great opportunity to beat Army this week, which would get another ranked win on their resume. And if they beat Army like they did against Navy, blowing them out, that would be a huge boost to Notre Dame's resume. Notre Dame's a playoff team. They win out. They beat Army, they beat USC, they're in. There's no denying it. They should host a first-round game. But they're going to strengthen that resume a lot more if they dominate Army like they just did against Navy a few weeks ago, winning that game by 37. So that's what I'm looking out for there. I think the top 6 remains roughly the same. We know the SEC is a jumbled mess. We understand that. The problem with that is you're not going to get any clarity in that conference tonight. You're not going to get any clarity on that conference really until conference championship weekend. We have to really see how these last 2 weeks of the regular season play out. Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee, as we mentioned, all legitimate contenders. Texas kind of feels like a lock right now, barring some. Even if Texas were to lose to Texas A&M next week, they're still getting in, right? The Longhorns are still getting in. So I think Texas is the only SEC team you can look at right now and confidently say they're in, unless they were to lose to Kentucky and A&M. They lose out, which isn't going to happen. Then you've got a different scenario there. But the rest of it, those 2-loss SEC teams, the Alabama, the Ole Miss, the Georgia, the Tennessee, all those teams that have 2 losses, how does the committee value them? Where do they rank them? What is the reasoning for where these teams are going to be ranked is another thing. Are you measuring best win? Are you measuring strength of schedule? Are you measuring, the eye test? I mean, what are we looking at here? Because some of these rankings, as we've seen, they're not valuing head-to-head. They're not valuing margin of victory. They're not valuing some of these key factors that I believe should be factored in to a ranking of this magnitude. So that is something to watch out for. But again, we can talk it to death tonight based on what we see. We could talk it to death next week. But bottom line is, you're not going to get clarity in the SEC until the end of next Saturday. Not this Saturday, but next Saturday. You're not going to get any clarity there whatsoever. And even still, it might be up for debate. What we do know is this. As we get closer to the new set of rankings here, again, all of you watching now, watching later, we welcome you. We're so glad you could join us today here at the Gridiron Expert. We'll be giving you our live reaction here shortly and bringing in our good friend Connor Hibbett in shortly as well. But what I was going to say is one thing that I think we can all confidently agree on. And there's a very good chance you're getting, seven teams, 7 of your 12 teams are going to come from the SEC and the Big Ten. The other 5 would be Notre Dame, your ACC champion, your Big 12 champion, and your Group of 5 champion, right? So maybe you can make a case for 8, right? 8 teams. 8 teams out of the Big Ten or the SEC. 7 or 8 teams, though, are going to come from 2 conferences. And this just kind of shows how dominant these conferences are. Some would say how biased they are, what have you. But the SEC and the Big Ten, I think we can all agree, without a doubt, are the 2 toughest, most competitive conferences in the country right now. And so it's only natural that you're going to see a handful of teams from those conferences get in that have multiple losses. The question is, will we see a team that gets in with 3 losses? When we see a team that gets in with 3 losses, will we see a team that gets in with 2 losses? That is the $1 million question. But ultimately, guys, despite how hectic Week 12 was, despite the amount of top 25 teams we did see that lost, it's not going to affect these rankings that bad. Again, Tennessee and BYU, the biggest. Everything else, not going to play that big of a role in the rankings tonight and really in the playoff picture as a whole. We've got the rankings coming on the screen right now. Let's go ahead and dive into it. Immediate reactions, watching them live with you. Illinois in at number 25. They deserve to be ranked. Fighting Illini, 7-3. Only three losses. Two of them, though, to Oregon and Penn State. We've got Illinois at number 23. UNLV in at 24. Exactly where we have them. We have UNLV ranked at 24 as well. I would have put Illinois slightly ahead of them. That's just me. That's exactly where I would have had them. But we've got them there. Missouri being ranked still is an absolute disgrace. That is an absolute travesty and shows the incompetence of the committee. You lose to South Carolina on the road. You're 7-3. You've played horrible in your biggest games of the year, such as A&M and Alabama, and you still have them ranked, not even moving. Absolutely ridiculous. Missouri does not deserve to be there. Iowa State at 22, exactly where I have the Cyclones. So far, not bad. And Arizona State at 21, exactly where I have Arizona State. And keep in mind, we did put out our rankings yesterday. We put our rankings out yesterday right here on the channel, well before the committee released their rankings. So honestly, in that bottom five of the top 25, I agree with most of it. I agree with the teams that are there, with the exception of Missouri. I have no idea how you can continue to rank the Tigers. The only reason I believe they're doing it is to strengthen the teams that are well ahead of them, to strengthen those SEC teams that are in playoff contention. It makes Alabama look a lot better. It's going to make, is that about it, right? I mean, Alabama's the only team they have. They don't play Ole Miss. They didn't play Georgia, if I'm not mistaken. So A&M, obviously, still in contention. Makes those teams look better. Strengthens the SEC. And that's not good. Tulane in at number 20. Also exactly where I have them. I have Tulane sitting at number 20. So far, committee actually doing a decent job. Army at number 19. I've got Army at number 18. So I'm not going to be too upset about that. Army playing really, really good football, very efficient football. The group of five race for the college football playoff spot, that group of five playoff spot gets really interesting if Army beats Notre Dame on Saturday. It gets very interesting. South Carolina at 18. I've got South Carolina at 19. So I just flipped Carolina and Army. I have Army ranked there. South Carolina one below them. Clemson at 17. I've got Clemson at 15. So not horribly off. Not horribly off, but Clemson at 17 there. If they can win out, that includes a win in the AC Championship. They need some help to get there. They'll be a playoff team. Probably not good enough to get all the way there, though, without winning the ACC, obviously. Colorado at 16, exactly where I had the Buffaloes as well. I have Colorado ranked at number 16. We had that in our rankings again yesterday. So, again, I'm not opposed. I'm not opposed to what I'm seeing here so far. A couple minor changes. But the biggest thing, again, that I'm frustrated with is Missouri. A&M at 15. I've got A&M down at 17, so not maybe as high. I think, really I would switch Clemson and Texas A&M. And I really think if you put those two teams on a neutral site right now, a neutral field, I would take Clemson in that game. BYU, wow. 8 spots all the way down to 14. 8 spots for BYU all the way down to 14, which means they're going to be out of the playoff picture as of right now. Although, granted, with Colorado being where they are, technically BYU, I guess, would be in the picture as they are the highest ranked Big 12 champion. If the season were to end today, they'd go. Obviously, we have to see how these conference championships play out. But BYU dropping that far is very, very interesting. And keep in mind, guys, I mean, hey, winning your conference is great, but it could, depending on where you're ranked when you win your conference or where the committee deems you worthy, you might not get a first-round bye. These conference champions, that's what they're striving for. So BYU, it's a big, big drop after losing at home by only 3 to Kansas. SMU up a spot to number 13. That is where I have the Mustangs as well. That means Boise State is at least 11th or 12th. Probably going to be 12th here with Boise slightly ahead of the Mustangs would be my guess. I've got SMU, again, at number 13. No disagreements there. Rhett Lashley's doing a phenomenal, phenomenal job with the Mustangs, and they are on track to make the ACC championship in their first year in the conference. But a little bit surprising for some. I'm still a little surprised by BYU. Boise at 12, as expected. I've got Boise at 14. And I'm going to tell you right now, I could go on and on with this. I don't understand why we are giving basically giving the Heisman to Travis Hunter. Ashton Genty, for me, should be the Heisman Trophy winner. Hunter's amazing. He's a great athlete. He's playing great ball, but it's ridiculous that we've pretty much already gifted it to Travis Hunter. Strongly disagree with that. Tennessee, rounding out that next four, coming in at number 11. I've got Tennessee at 12, so I'm not too upset with that. Georgia up to number 10. We had Georgia at number 9. So just slightly different there. It's interesting to see how far BYU fell versus how far Tennessee fell. I know they're different losses, different teams. Losing on the road to Georgia is different than losing at home to Kansas, but still. Ole Miss up to number 9. I've got Ole Miss at number 8, which means Miami is going to be a little bit higher than maybe we expected. Miami's going to be at least 7th or 8th here in the ranking. My gut would say 8th. There you go. Coming in at number 8, Miami, who I have down at number 10. So again, some minor differences there, but so far, I agree with the teams that are in the top 10, and everything else is going to go pretty much as expected. Alabama at 7, that's exactly where we have the Crimson Tide. I imagine at 6, they would have a Notre Dame. I imagine it would go Notre Dame at 6, Indiana at 5, Penn State, Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, rounding it out. We'll wait and see. what is said. But that is how I imagine this would go. Again, there you go. Notre Dame at 6. Because as we mentioned right before the stream started, we didn't really expect, because these teams took care of business, because there was not much movement ahead of them, we expected the top 5 or 6 to remain the same. And there you go. Indiana at 5. I think we can go through this. Indiana's going to be at 5. Penn State should be at 4. Texas should be at 3. Ohio State at 2. Oregon at 1. And that would round it out. And that, again, was expected. Should not come as a surprise to anybody. That means you're going to have a massive top 5 showdown on Saturday between Ohio State and Indiana, which is going to be absolutely amazing. And for all the people that are, and we'll talk more about this here in a little bit, but for all the people that are saying that Ohio State's just going to annihilate Indiana, I strongly disagree. I'm not going to go here right now and say Indiana's going to win the game. We're predicting that game officially tomorrow here on the channel. But look, a lot of people want to say Indiana has played a weak schedule. They haven't played anybody. Who's Ohio State played out of Oregon and Penn State? Yeah, they played 2 tough games. Both those games are tougher, sure, than maybe what Indiana has faced. But if you really want to draw comparisons, Ohio State got very, very lucky in their win against Nebraska. Indiana annihilated Nebraska. Indiana beat Michigan State by more than Ohio State beat Michigan State. I mean, if you want to compare the common opponents they've had, Indiana has, in a way, outplayed Ohio State in those games. And again, granted, Ohio State has played tougher teams. They've had to go to Oregon. They've had to go to Penn State. But Indiana is playing dang good football, efficient football, and they are dominating when it comes at least to the eye test. They are looking good in those wins. Indiana would not be ranked 5th right now if all of their wins had come by 1 possession. If they were 10-0, all by 1 possession, they would not be number 5. It's because of how they're winning that has gotten them to this spot. Kurt Cignetti continues to prove the doubters wrong. He's looking to do it one more time on Saturday in Columbus. And again, we'll have that prediction for you tomorrow. So that rounds out the top 25, guys. If you look at the playoff field, they're showing you on the screen. Based on these rankings, the first team out would be Tennessee. So once again, it's a 12-team playoff field. Even though Tennessee's number 11 in their rankings, they would not make the top 12. That's, again, because of the conference champions, because of the group of 5 representatives, because of Notre Dame. All those reasonings there that a team like Tennessee and SMU get left out. A reason that BYU, as we just mentioned, is a few spots ahead of Colorado, but because they're their highest-ranked Big 12 team, they would be in the field right now, but wouldn't get a first-round bye. In this scenario, guys, Boise State is getting a first-round bye, which goes, again, those first-round byes go to the highest-ranked conference champions. Whatever the 4 conference champions are, they would get there. So how about that? Boise State, who is ranked 12th, would be a 4 seed. That's amazing. That is amazing for the Broncos. And this is a legitimate possibility. What this tells me is that if Boise State wins out, it's going to be, in my eyes, be very difficult. If Boise State wins out, it's going to be very difficult for maybe whoever wins the Big 12, whether it's BYU, Colorado, Arizona State, whoever it is, to jump them and take over that first-round bye. Boise's already a couple spots ahead, so whoever wins the Big 12, you would have to justify jumping them multiple spots above Boise State to get them to that first round bye spot. So if you're Boise State, you're looking really, really good right now. You're feeling really good right now, saying, hey, all we got to do is take care of business. Ash and Gente's just got to stay healthy, take care of business, win the Mountain West, and you are going to be one step closer to possible national championship. Although facing maybe Ohio State in the quarterfinals or whoever the 5 seed would be, could be Ohio State, Alabama, who knows what's going to happen the rest of the year, would be far from ideal. But that is, we talked about this last week. We said, is there a possibility? Is there a path for Boise State or whoever the group of 5 team would be, but more likely Boise State, to get a first round bye or at the very least host a first round game? Yes. And we just saw that to be the case tonight. So a lot to break down, a lot to jump into. We will be taking your questions tonight in the chat. We'll make sure to address some of the best ones and try to get to everybody. We appreciate everybody that is here right now. So again, thank you for being with us here on the Gridiron Expert, our college football playoff week 13 live reaction show, and a lot to react to. But what I want to do is I want to bring in our friend of the program. I want to bring in our guy, Connor Hibbett, the college football encyclopedia. Y'all have heard me talk a lot last 20 minutes. You've heard me share my thoughts. Let's get an outsider's perspective, another analyst perspective. So let's bring him in here. Connor, how's it going?
It's going great, man. Thank you for having me on the show again.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Absolutely. Well, I know I saw you were watching it live with us. Had a couple texts you were sending me, a couple faces you were making on the screen. So got a new top 25. What are some of your initial takeaways?
I actually like it. And I'm one of those people that's quality of talent over quality of performance. The quality of performance teams, they hit all the right buttons throughout the season. But if they slip up on one of those buttons, then you see their downside. You see their floor. The floors for the quality of talent teams are just so high. And the biggest argument with people who see it from the perspective of who's deserving rather than who's really good, they're going to argue, then why do you even play a season if you think that way, right? And I can understand that kind of thinking. But here's the biggest takeaway with the way that I think. If you put a BYU in the top 10 and leave them in the playoff because of what they've done through the first several weeks, and I get it because that's the deserving crowd. So I'm answering for the deserving crowd. Do you really think BYU or an Indiana has the talent to make a deep run? We're going to really find out what Indiana is truly made of this weekend. Remember, I was very high on the Hoosiers in the preseason. I was the only one talking up the Hoosiers. So if anyone can say otherwise about Indiana, I have the right to do so, in my opinion. But with BYU, Army, those kind of teams, it's the quality of performance teams. Like, they've hit their ceiling on a week-to-week basis. And the second they lose, you're going to see the committee's going to drop them. Alex, I talked about this a month ago about BYU. I said the second they lose, they're going to drop several spots because the committee is waiting for a team that's been very lucky so far to lose. And give BYU all the credit in the world, but they are not nearly as good as their record. I mean, there's a reason why BYU was only a 2.5-point favorite at home against a 3-6 team at the time in the Jayhawks. There is a reason why. It's not because, they're not getting the respect they deserve. We saw it. KU was, you could argue that Kansas was a little fortunate to win, but gravitation toward the mean there for BYU. And then Army, we're going to find out what they're truly made of this weekend against Notre Dame. And it wouldn't shock me if Ohio State against Indiana and Notre Dame against Army, if both of those teams win by at least 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, I like what you said too. It's kind of what I was alluding to as well. They're passing that eye test. Indiana would not be a top 5 team in the country even if they were 10-0. If all those games were won by 3 to 7 points, they would not be ranked as high as they are because they're just barely getting by. BYU got to where they are, and I'm not dogging on BYU, but I agree with you. Got to where they are because you think about it, they had like a 29-point win over what was a top 15 Kansas State team at the time. They beat SMU, and that win looks better and better with each week. But as we know, SMU hadn't switched to Kevin Jennings yet. There were a lot of things that have gone BYU's way that you replay those games now. Play SMU now. Play Kansas State now. Maybe not play Kansas State now. They're pretty bad now. But still, regardless, probably don't win those games. You got very fortunate against Oklahoma State. Got very fortunate against Utah. just barely getting by. You could argue they should be a 3-4 loss team right now.
Yep.
And I agree. So dropping 8 spots, Kansas was again a 3-6 team that was much better than their record showed, coming off that big win over Iowa State. I think we can all agree Kansas probably should have won the majority of the games they lost, as close as they were. But I do agree. I think the committee, like you kind of realized, all right, you just lost to a team at home at night. It's supposed to be a tough place to play, and you didn't show up. And I think what I want to ask you now is, what does this do for the Big 12? We know it's a wild race. But, we've seen it now. They've got BYU ranked as a 12 seed. I think Colorado is a team that's picking up a lot of steam. People are buying in on to win the conference. But what does this do for this conference for the next couple of weeks?
Real quick, I want to piggyback off of what you just said. What we saw with BYU this past weekend, that is BYU. What we saw against Utah, that is BYU. So people are saying, like, I saw some BYU fans on Twitter after the Utah game. We just played our worst game of the season and won. No, you didn't. That is BYU. BYU has been fortunate up to this point, and they've been playing a lot of the trending down teams in the Big 12. Now, remember, in the Big 12, they're all about the same. Now, obviously, Oklahoma State's 0-7 in conference play, which is a shock in itself to see them go from double-digit wins to not even making a bowl game this year, despite bringing back all their experience. I didn't think Oklahoma State was all that great of a team, but it just shows the little amount of difference in the Big 12. Moving forward, Alex, I'll just go ahead and make a take right now. Every year, at least in the near future, with the current alignment of college football, in the Big 12, if you have a winning record in one-score games, you have a chance to play in the conference championship because all teams are about the same. We see all these spreads, like Iowa State, who plays in Utah this Saturday. Iowa State's only a touchdown favorite, and Iowa State's considered to be one of the best teams in the Big 12 this year against Utah, who's right now considered to be one of the worst teams in the Big 12, and they're only a touchdown favorite. That's the Big 12. So I think what we've seen from BYU the last few weeks, that is who they are. They just got by with a lot of fortunate wins in the early going of the season. Repeat your question, Alex. I'm sorry, I got carried away there a little bit.
I mean, you're right. I think I've seen a couple of comments in there. People kind of calling BYU like the TCU 2.0. Back in 2022, TCU, also in the Big 12, a very similar team that was just getting by with each passing week. A lot of one-possession victory. I think they won 13 games, and 7 or 8 of them were decided by one possession. I mean, a very fortunate team, and we saw that last year. They go to the national championship the very next year. They drop to 5-7, don't even go bowling. So it just kind of shows, that was not – TCU had talent, give them credit for finding ways to win those games, but they were not nearly as good as that record shows. And it's an argument where, Kansas is a better team than their record shows. Maybe BYU is not as good of a team as their record shows.
I think that TCU team, I think a better comparison for them would actually be last year's Washington team. I think 2 years ago, TCU is actually like 10, maybe 11 to 12 points better than this year's BYU team. TCU still had 7 or 8 NFL draft picks. Washington last year had about, 6 or 7 NFL draft picks? And they were both very similar in the power ratings in both of those respective seasons. TCU was like 12 or 13 in the power ratings in 2022, and Washington was right about the same, if not exactly the same, last year. I'd have to go back and check, but they were within 1 or 2 spots of each of those respective seasons' power ratings. I think those two teams are pretty similar. They had some difference makers, and so I thought that those teams, in terms of like the national standings, like were legit. Did I think that they were national championship legit? No, but I thought they were like top 10, top 15-ish teams. This BYU team, as I said like a few weeks ago on the show, I think they're like in the 30s. So like maybe like the upper 30s. But in regards to what what was your question?
Yeah, I got off on a tangent there. So I mean, basically, what is this doing for the Big 12? We saw tonight they've got, if the season were to end today, technically BYU would be the champion. They're on top of the standings, but they'd be the 12th seed. We've got a interesting race in that conference between themselves, Colorado, Arizona State is in the mix. Honestly, the winner of BYU and Arizona State this Saturday, keeps themselves alive. The loser of it's out. So what does this do for the conference? And the piggyback off of that, do you believe that the Big 12 champion can get a first round bye, or if Boise wins out, do you think it's a done deal that Boise's getting that 4th spot?
I don't think it's a done deal. I've seen what the committee has done over the years with G5 teams. If Colorado were to win out, I think they could a first round bye and are the 4 seed. I think the ACC, as long as like SMU and Miami take care of business to whatever degree that is for those 2 teams this year, I think the winner, as long as those 2 teams play in the ACC championship, even if Clemson somehow sneaks in there, I think the winner of the ACC title will be the 3 seed because of who they beat in the ACC title. The winner of the Big 12 title, I can't say whether they will be the 4 seed or the 5 seed, or I guess get the that 5 seed and don't get that first round bye. It's hard to tell right now. I don't trust the committee to give Boise State a first round bye, but it's not like Boise State is 10 or 15 slots better than a few of these Big 12 teams. Like I mentioned, if Colorado wins out, I think they'll get a first round bye. Any other team though in the Big 12 right now? Yeah. I mean, there is certainly an argument for Boise to get that first round bye if any other team outside of Colorado ends up winning the Big 12 championship. So yeah, that'll be interesting. I honestly don't know about. So here's the way I'll answer that question is if any other team outside of Colorado ends up winning the Big 12 championship, maybe Boise State does get that first round bye.
Yeah, that's a fair assumption. It's interesting too with Colorado. They're 16th in the rankings right now. Boise was 12th, so you get a 4-spot gap there. Granted, it did. I will be very interested to see how that pans out. 'Cause I agree with you. I think they would love to see Coach Prime get the first round bye. They're hyping up Colorado, the Heisman Trophy winner, because they're basically giving it to Travis Hunter, even though I think that's extremely wrong to do compared to Ashton Jeanty. But there's a 4-spot gap right now, and Colorado doesn't play anybody either. If you want to go, oh, well, Boise State's not going to beat anybody good. Well, yeah, neither is Colorado. If Colorado wins out, they're beating Kansas and they're beating Oklahoma State. And then whoever they play in the Big 12 championship, maybe it's BYU, maybe it's Arizona. I mean, again, we don't know. But you're playing a maybe top 15, top 20 team. Boise, yeah, probably isn't going to get another ranked win on their resume, even if they play, UNLV again. You might get a top 20 UNLV team, but they might need some help. Regardless, you're telling me that Colorado over the next few weeks would have to jump at least 5 spots to jump Boise State to get that spot. And I think that would be extremely wrong to do considering the resumes are there. And Boise would be a 1-loss team, lone loss by 3 on the road to the number 1 team in the country versus Colorado having 2 losses. And we're kind of ignoring the fact that we'll go to another question in a second. Everybody wants to point out your bad losses, right? Oh, but they lost to this team. They lost to that team. Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois, this and that and the other. Colorado got their butts whooped by Nebraska, who is not a good team. Nebraska is 5-5, in danger of missing out on the postseason again, despite starting 5-1. They're not a good football team. And so if you want to play the argument of, oh, this bad loss, point at Colorado. That's a bad loss. To Nebraska. Point at BYU. The loss to Kansas is a bad loss. Honestly, the majority of the teams in the top 15, 16 range have at least 1 bad loss on their resume. If we're being completely honest, the majority of them do. So again, if you're the committee, in my opinion, you can't tell me 1 bad loss is worse than another. I mean, you could argue Northern Illinois is worse than Nebraska and that, but regardless, it's still a bad loss. I almost feel like that argument needs to cancel itself out if you're comparing the teams. Like, all right, then who have you beat after that? Notre Dame has better quality wins right now than Colorado does, no doubt about it.
I have a question for you, Alex. How many teams in the SEC and the Big Ten combined do you think deserve to make the playoff? I guess I should say outside of conference champions.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll just outside of it, so let's say SEC, Big Ten, we'll scratch Oregon and Texas. Let's say those are your conference champions. Then after the Big Ten, I think you've got to put in, or for the Big Ten, I think you got to put in Ohio State. I think assuming these teams win out, I think you put in Ohio State. I think you got to put in Penn State. I almost argue for Indiana to get in if they play Ohio State close. If that game is within, honestly, I say 10 points. If they play with Ohio State within 10 on Saturday, and then they crush Purdue, which they probably will, then 11-1 Indiana, I don't think deserves to be left out. They'll be a low seed. They'll have to go on the road for their first round game, but that's fine. So I would say Ohio State. I'd say Penn State. I'd say Indiana. And then the SEC, so that's 4 total Big Ten teams. SEC, again, if Alabama wins out, they've got to go. If Ole Miss wins out, they've got to go. and I guess Georgia as well, only because of their last win over Tennessee, and that's a conflicting thing, right? The SEC is so tough this year with that jumbled mess of Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, and Tennessee all having 2 losses and really all having beat up on each other.
Yeah. And a lot of people are not, especially people that don't like the SEC and the Big Ten, they are not going to want to face the truth. And the truth of the matter is half, oh no, probably what, no, 11 or 12 teams of the SEC are better than the best team in the Big 12 and the ACC. And so I think you're right, Alex. I think 7, maybe even 8 teams from the SEC and the Big Ten combined deserve to make the college football playoff.
Yeah, and I think it's inevitable at that point. We were talking about that right before the rankings were released. I mean, you've got a lot of your top 12 to 15 dominated from that conference. You're getting the Big 12 team in. As we mentioned, the Big 12 and the ACC feel like one big league. So there's 2. Notre Dame, if they win out, they're getting in. So that's 3. And then your group of 5 team, that's 4. So that leaves 8 spots up for grabs. A couple of those will be conference champions, but 8 spots left. And who's it going to be between? It's going to be between the SEC and the Big Ten, because I don't envision a world, because of how, not, you don't want to use the word weak, but they're definitely not as competitive as the SEC or Big Ten. So I guess I will say the word weak. As weak as the Big 12 is, as weak as the ACC is, this is not a multi-bid conference. And I think we've seen that the last few weeks too with the ACC. Miami feels like the favorite to win the conference right now, and they would get a first-round bye because of it. SMU has not cracked that projected playoff field these last few weeks. They've got them ranked pretty high, got them ranked 13th in the country, but that's still not good enough to get them into a playoff field of the season end today. It's been the last few weeks, and the Mustangs haven't budged a bit. And despite only losing 1 game, 2 lost SEC teams are ahead of them and getting into this field. Now, again, if SMU wins the ACC, they're a lot, but if you start comparing the resumes, a 2-loss SMU with a loss in the conference championship compared to a 2-loss, Ole Miss, who doesn't even go to the SEC championship, unfortunately, Ole Miss is going to get in every single time.
Yes. And gosh, Ole Miss, they are one of the hottest teams in the country right now. I would not want to face them in the playoff.
No, not at all. Yeah, with that offense, as good as they're playing, I don't know many teams that can slow them down defensively. There aren't many. And I'd love to see it. I'd love to see a first-round game between an Ole Miss offense and a really, really good defense. I don't know who that would be, because you're probably not going to see like an Ole Miss Ohio State, an Ole Miss Notre Dame, although that'd be a fun matchup. Ole Miss Penn State, but you never know. I think the projected game right now would be Ole Miss Penn State. That actually leads me to another question for you, and I know you and I probably agree on this to an extent. So we get to Selection Sunday. Conference championships have played out the way they have. Everything's played out the way they have. Do you envision a scenario? I mean, the conference champions are not up for debate, right? Those are the teams that are going to get those first-round byes. You can't argue that. But those 5 through 12 rankings, do you envision a scenario where the committee, tweaks it just a little bit to get a more enticing matchup in the first round, to avoid another conference matchup in the first round? For example, you've got, let's say, Alabama at 8, Ole Miss at 9. So do we really want to see Ole Miss and Bama in the first round? Many of us probably would, but maybe they go, ooh, no, we'd rather see, Alabama host his other teams. We're going to move Ole Miss down just 1 spot, because what's the big deal? I guess in a way, do you see them maybe not ranking the teams as fairly as they should, so that they can ensure to get a better first-round matchup from a ratings perspective?
Exactly, 100%. Yes, that's what I'm expecting. 2 months ago, for an episode of Mean Green Game Day for North Texas Television, I put out every single analyst on the show gave their predicted playoff. This was like late September, early October, and if I remember the matchups correctly that I predicted, I had Ole Miss playing Penn State. I had, I think, Alabama playing Notre Dame. I don't remember all the matchups that I had from the at-large bids, but I think I had Ohio State beating Oregon for the Big Ten championship, and then I had Boise State at the time, I think, as the 11 seed because the committee doesn't want to see an Oregon Boise State round 2. I'm trying to remember everything else that I had, but yes, Alex, that's basically what I went by. I went by TV ratings and what the general public would love to see, as well as what would increase TV ratings.
Exactly, and that's what's really frustrating is I know back in the preseason, before the season started, I had I don't know if I changed my pick or what it was, but I'm doing all my preseason predictions. I'm projecting my playoff field, and it came out to a Boise State Oregon game again. And I sat there and I was like, I could predict this right now, but it wouldn't happen because the committee wouldn't allow it to happen. So it's one of those things where because you're right. Let's say something happens and Boise gets back into that 12 seed, which right now it's not looking to be the case, but just bear with me. Ohio State beats Oregon in the Big Ten championship. Oregon's not dropping far, but since they're not a conference champ, they're not going to get a first round bye. They're going to be the highest ranked team after that, so it'll be 5. 5 Oregon, that's a lot. They're definitely getting that spot. In theory, they should play Boise State at the 12 or whoever that group of 5 team is. But it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest for them to go, oh, we don't want to see a rematch, so we'll just make Boise the 11 seed. That way we can just avoid that rematch. My argument is, look, I know college is different than NFL. I get it. Look, in NFL, we see these teams play each other at least twice a year, at least within the division, right? Division teams play twice a year, home and home. Sometimes you see them play 3 times a year because, NFL standings, where they work out, there's no bias. You don't have a committee selecting that. So if you play a division opponent in the first round of the playoffs, you do that. It's the 3rd time you played them. You make do. And these teams that could potentially have rematches in the college football playoff, I'm not opposed to those rematches, especially if they've been so long. It was week 2 when Oregon played Boise State. I'm trying to think of other teams that have faced each other. Alabama and Georgia, if that somehow was a first round matchup, that was back in September. So much has changed since then. I get maybe people don't want to see, a team play in the season finale and then play in the first round of the playoffs that close together. But if that's also how it shakes out, that's how it shakes out. I don't think these teams are going to complain about being in the college football playoff and playing a team they've already seen. And that's
right.
just.
And in regard, your very first question, you asked me what my general thoughts were about the playoff rankings. I do want to bring something else up regarding the playoff rankings tonight. SMU being ahead of BYU. I like the head-to-head matchup counting, so I would have had BYU 1 spot of SMU. I think the committee ranked SMU and BYU that way, though, and I don't agree with it. But the reason why I think they did that is because of 2 reasons. One, SMU switched out their quarterback and is a completely different team now than what they were when they were playing BYU, and BYU is still the same team as they were back then. And then second, and this is the biggest reason, I think that's the committee's way of saying, in case one of the teams from Indiana, Notre Dame or Indiana, don't end up making the playoff, this is their way of saying we're going to put 2 ACC teams in and not 2 Big 12 teams in.
Interesting. Kind of a early contingency plan, putting the Mustangs that high in the event that maybe Indiana gets blown out or Notre Dame loses to Army or USC.
Yeah, and if SMU ends up beating Miami, they won't have to drop Miami as far, and then of course they'll move up SMU. Or if SMU wins, if Miami ends up beating SMU, and whatever Big 12 team is slightly behind SMU doesn't end up winning the Big 12 championship, obviously the Big 12 champion will be in the playoff. They won't have to make that argument for that second Big 12 team to be in because they already had SMU ahead of that next top Big 12 team.
Interesting. So, it's kind of funny. It's like that old saying, or there's a scene, I should say, in the Avengers. I don't know if you've seen that movie. Anybody's seen that movie, but they come in there and Tony Stark walks in and he's like, that guy over there is playing Galaga. He said, they didn't think we noticed, but we did. We noticed it. We saw it. And I feel like that's what we're looking at every week with the committee. It's like they're already planning, 2-3 weeks in advance. And it's like, no one's going to look that deep into this. It's like, no. We see what you're doing. That's why I think Missouri's ranked. That's exactly what Missouri's still ranked. They're sitting there at 23rd, despite having no good wins on their resume, despite getting blown out by A&M and Bama, and then losing to South Carolina. Didn't move up, didn't move down. Stay put at 23. Why? Because it helps Alabama. It helps Alabama up at number 7. It helps A&M, who is still in the playoff hunt and definitely could, still make the playoff if they can beat Texas in the season finale. It helps those teams and their strength of schedules going forward. It helps South Carolina. Some people think the Gamecocks could rise up the ranks and be a playoff contender if things get really crazy over the last few weeks. So it's a travesty, though. I mean, and I know Missouri's no playoff contender. It means nothing having them at 23. It means nothing for them, but it does mean something for the teams above them.
Yeah, exactly. Alex, do you remember one of my SEC double takes that I made in the preseason? One was I thought Texas floor in their first year in the SEC was 9-3. Two reasons. One, I thought Texas roster was elite. Second, I thought their schedule was actually very manageable for an SEC team. And then the other double take was Texas A&M finally finishes ranked by the end of the season. So they finish the season ranked. I was going with that because, for one, I was kind of bullish on Texas A&M. I thought they had some upside this year. But in case they hit their floor, or at least what I perceived to be their floor, I thought there was a chance that they would be ranked by season's end because of the playoff rankings. Picking an 8-4-ish kind of SEC team at 23 or 24. We're seeing that right now with teams that are on the trajectory to finishing 8-4, and they have them ranked in that 21 to 25 range because of what you just said, Alex. Those teams are ranked to give another SEC team that's currently 8 to 10 slots ahead of them, to give those teams a ranked win, at least at the time of Selection Sunday.
Exactly.
And there's a good chance that some of those teams, like a Missouri, we'll see how A&M finishes out the season. Maybe an A&M, even if they finish, say, 9-4 by season's end with a bowl victory, they would rank those teams in the AP top 25 because we know the AP voters look at what the playoff rankings do when you get to this point in the season. That's what it's okay. That was a long explanation, but that's why I gave one of those double takes. And that's something that we as the general public should be looking at every year moving forward with the SEC and what the committee does with their current agenda. Do I agree that the SEC deserves to have more teams in the playoff than any other conference? Yes. But we obviously know the committee plays this kind of situationally every single week.
Yeah, well, it is a massive contingency plan because here's the thing. They're looking at the rankings now. They're looking at the schedule ahead of time. Anything can happen. But it's like, more than likely, Alabama's probably going to win out. More than likely, this team's going to win out. We don't know what's going to happen with everybody else. We don't know what teams can get into conference championships. But it's like we're looking at the rankings now, but we're also looking at what could happen in 2 weeks from now and how we can positively or negatively impact these teams. And it almost sounds like such a major conspiracy theory. It sounds like we're almost like bitter fans. The irony in it, neither of our teams are ranked in this top 25. We don't have a dog in this fight. We have nothing against the teams that are ranked where they are. It's just a matter of just logic. Use your head a little bit. The committee does not. They typically don't. And I think you and I have agreed for many, many years now that it's a kind of a flawed system. We've got a lot of guys, picking these teams and ranking these teams that don't really even watch the games, that maybe have some biases towards either their own school because it's a bunch of athletic directors or former alums or players, whatever it may be. It's a very, very flawed system, and unfortunately, I don't think it'll ever get fixed. But at least it's a good discussion. I guess we can give it that.
And man, it's making college football a little less enjoyable, at least for me, because it used to be you saw a little bit more widespread talent, and I think some people would still argue that they think that there is because of the transfer portal. I disagree. I think a lot of the guys that transfer down were overrated recruits, and then the guys that transfer up, well, they are actually proving that they can be legit in the college level, and then they end up transferring up, and maybe they don't do quite as well, but they still end up being a potential NFL draft pick, but they are actually legit. While the guys that transfer down, again, were just kind of overrated recruits. But it's making college football a lot less enjoyable for me because when I'm looking at these teams on a week-to-week basis, the eye test, so to speak, the Big 12, even the ACC, like what team from the G5, the ACC, and the Big 12, of all those teams, what team is actually legit?
Yeah, I mean the out of those, I mean I give the edge to Miami. Is probably the best.
Yeah, they have the highest ceiling, I think, of those teams. You know what team's also playing very well right now? And I think right now they are currently the best G5 team, but Boise State's still deserving of the spot as of now. Tulane.
Yeah.
Tulane is playing some serious good football right now. John Summerall is a coach to watch for to move up the coaching rankings and the coaching pedestal in the near future. My gosh, John Summerall is a genius. Look what he did at Troy. Look where Troy is now.
Yeah,
and
right.
Look what he's doing at Tulane. I know Willie Fritz left him some pretty good players. But yeah, Tulane is they are not a team that any power conference team would want to face.
No, not at all. And that win over Navy, I know Navy wasn't ranked anymore, but Navy was still a very good football team, was very, very impressive. I mean, 35-0 on the road. Yeah. And that's the thing, right? You got Tulane ranked 20th, and we're about to go to some questions in the chat. But Tulane's ranked 20th. That's why these next few weeks are so interesting for the group of five, is because if Boise slips up somewhere, whether it's, it could be anybody. I think they got Wyoming, San Jose State, and whoever they play in the Mountain West in the championship game. If they slip up just once, they're probably done. And it opens the door for Army. It opens the door for Tulane. It opens the door slightly for UNLV if it's UNLV that beats Boise in the Mountain West Championship. Although I don't see UNLV getting in above Tulane if Tulane ends up winning out, including a win over Army in the championship game. So that race for that group of five spot is by no means a done deal. Boise, I know, is the favorite, but they're one massive upset away from shaking up this entire thing.
Yes, I agree with that. And my gosh, that would be crazy. Like, what would the committee do at that point?
I think if Boise does lose, I think it probably is going to end up going to Tulane or Army. And that's the interesting thing, right? Really, Army, well, if Army loses to Notre Dame, and more than likely that will happen, people would say they don't deserve it. But if Army does that and then bounces back later and beats Tulane in the championship game, that's a top 20 victory on their resume. You've got a one-loss Army team who won their conference. Should they not? Tulane would be out at that point. Tulane wouldn't get in. So it really would come down to Army and whoever wins the Mountain West Championship. So either a one-loss Army team or a two-loss Boise team if they won the Mountain West, losing one of their final regular season games, or a one-loss Army team and a maybe two-loss UNLV team. And honestly, in that scenario, I think UNLV goes.
You know who is actually currently slated to play Boise State in the Mountain West Championship?
Colorado State.
Hey, Rams to the playoff. Let's go.
What's funny is their quarterback, their star quarterback, and their star wide receiver both said that. They said, a lot of other schools were offering them massive NIL money to leave Colorado State and go play for them. And they said, no, we're staying to take Colorado State to the playoff. And everybody laughed at them. Well, if the Rams went out and beat Boise State and then get some help from pretty much the best way for Colorado State to get in would be like UNLV loses one more game in the regular season, Boise doesn't win the Mountain West, and probably preferably loses a regular season game. Army loses to Notre Dame but beats Tulane. There's a path. There, believe it or not, there's maybe a slight path. I don't know if I agree with it, but I would not rule it out.
Here is a path. I don't think it's going to happen. But if this actually does occur, I would not know what to do. If I'm in that room in the committee having to rank these teams for 12 teams to ultimately make the playoff, what about, and again, I don't think it's happening, what about if Army beats Notre Dame, wins out, beats Tulane in the AAC title, finishes, oh gosh, I guess at that point they might be 14-0 because they'd be 13-0 and then they play Navy.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say they're well, it doesn't matter because they play Navy after the committee makes their rankings.
Right.
So let's just say they're 13-0 at that point. And then Boise State wins out and they win the Mountain West Championship over either Colorado State or UNLV. And the Big 12 has a little bit more chaos. KU takes down Colorado, or Arizona State takes down BYU. And then Iowa State and Arizona State wins out. Iowa State would play if either Colorado or BYU win this weekend, and if Iowa State wins out, Iowa State would play either Colorado or BYU for the Mountain West. For the Big 12 championship. There is still some chaos to occur in the Big 12. Here's where I'm going with this. Does the committee consider at that point putting two G5 teams in the playoff, or do they leave out Army at like that 13 or 14 spot?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like if Army wins out, they've got to be in
Right.
this
So
scenario. Yeah.
right. What does the committee do? I guess they're putting two G5 teams in.
Yeah, but they'll find a way not to. They'll find a way not to. They can't risk that because here's the bottom line. As awesome as that would be to see, we all know more than likely Boise State and Army are not going to make a run to the national championship, even to the semifinals.
Right.
Probably won't even win a game. I mean, they might, but probably not. So it's one of those things like, do we want to have two maybe blowout games in our quarterfinals or blowout games in our first round? No, we got to put a team that we think is better in there, even if they're more deserving. Come to that argument, even with the 12-team playoff, you come back around to that argument, the 12 best or the 12 most deserving. We used to have that argument a lot with the 4-team format. I thought that might kind of go away a little bit with the 12-team. In this scenario, that wouldn't be the case. God, but I'd love to see it, though. Can you imagine? Just have Boise State and Army in the playoff. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, and again, I don't think Army's beating Notre Dame this Saturday. But if they do, everyone's going to start having that discussion. Then the committee is going to be pulling for Tulane big time against Army. And I do think Tulane's going to beat Army. I have more confidence actually, I have a lot of confidence in Notre Dame beating Army. I think Army's losing to Notre Dame and Tulane, though. So
more than likely, I would agree. We've seen both those teams defensively play so well against the option. We saw Tulane and Army, I've been saying since the beginning, is better than Navy this year. But for Notre Dame to win that game by 37, for Notre Dame or for Tulane to win that game by 35, Army's better than Navy, but they play very similar styles. Notre Dame and Tulane will be just fine facing up against that. So it doesn't bode well for the Black Knights, I'd say. Go ahead.
I was going to say, hey, I found out how to, from my angle here, look up the comments. Remember last time I said I couldn't see the comments, but now I can.
Oh, yeah?
I see Scotty B, the Baylor King, prediction on who gets to the Big 12 title game. He says, my guess is Arizona State and Colorado. Alex, what is your take there?
Well, I actually think as of right now, probably agree with them because I think Arizona State will more than likely beat BYU. We're gonna predict that game in deeper detail on Friday, but I feel pretty confident, especially out in the desert. Arizona State taking care of business. Colorado's kind of like Ole Miss, not as good as Ole Miss, but they're hot right now. They're playing good ball. They're winning these games in convincing fashion. Offense is rolling. The defense is taking off significantly. So, I don't think Colorado loses to Kansas. I don't think they lose to Oklahoma State. I think Colorado's not a lock. Anything can happen, but I think they're going to the Big 12 championship game. Arizona State, they beat BYU. That pretty much is going to eliminate BYU. It's 2 conference losses. So, yeah, I think I'm actually in agreement with Scotty on this one.
Are you predicting Iowa State to lose at least one of their next 2 games at Utah and then versus Kansas State?
The Kansas State game is going to be very interesting to me. It's going to come down to the matter of motivation for both. Kansas State was a team that a lot of us had making the playoff or making the Big 12 championship, maybe making the playoff. That's not going to happen anymore unless this massive chaos breaks out in the conference of the last 2 weeks. Iowa State, is that game in Manhattan or is it in Ames?
It's in Ames.
Yeah, I'd probably take Iowa State in both. Yeah.
So if Iowa State wins out and if Arizona State does end up beating BYU, and let's just say Colorado wins out even against KU, Colorado would play for the Big 12 championship. They'll likely beat Oklahoma State. But Iowa State, if Iowa State wins out, would actually be in the Big 12 championship over Arizona State because of the tiebreaker, and not because they have a head-to-head tiebreaker. They haven't played each other this year, but because of their combined conference opponent win percentage and essentially their strength of schedule in the Big 12. Iowa State would be, I think, just a couple or a few games over Arizona State, or a couple percentage points over Arizona State in that case. So Iowa State, if you have 3 7-2 teams in the Big 12 by that point, Iowa State would actually win that tiebreaker.
Interesting. I haven't done too deep of a dive into the tie-breaking scenarios, but what I'm hearing is the dream's not dead for Iowa State. I think a lot of people thought they were done when they lost those back-to-back games to Tech and Kansas, but the dream's still alive. The dream's still very much alive for Iowa State. And then again, you win the Big 12 championship, even with 2 losses, you are in to the college football playoffs. So it is not over yet for the Cyclones.
And when you look at the Big 12, I think the 2 teams I'm not going to be picking the Big 12 team, whoever ends up making the playoff, to make a deep run. But the teams who are best equipped to look good in the playoff, I think, are Colorado and Iowa State.
Fair enough. Fair enough. We'll do a deeper dive into that here shortly. I want to quickly give a shout out to my man DM. It's been a while since we've had him in the chat. So DM, good to see you. Lots going on here. I'll be reaching out to you shortly, man. I will definitely be reaching out to you very, very soon. But happy to have you here, DM. As always, you're a huge, huge part of what we do here, and cannot thank you enough for all of your support. So happy to have you on board, even if just for a little bit. And hope all is going well. Connor and I are going to answer a few last questions, then we'll slowly wrap things up tonight. I know we saw Scotty's question. I'm scrolling through here. I want to throw a couple on the screen. Let's see here. Or even just bold statements sometimes are worth putting on there. I like Tim here. Tim's our resident Washington State fan. He says he's in belief that Jake Dicker is a complete and utter fraud, wasted Cam Ward and his talents, and that he believes his team should be 11-1 with this Power 5 roster. He needs to be fired. I'll give my thoughts. I'll get Connor's thoughts. Tim, I think the loss in New Mexico was very bad. Although I think it was, I'm not going to say you do feel like it was coming. Both New Mexico and Washington State have horrendous defenses. And New Mexico has been very competitive, more so than recent years under Bronco Mendenhall. So credit to him for turning things around. And all I can think about for New Mexico is that Montana State game from week 1 or week 0. Like if they had won that game, they'd be going bowling right now. I think that's right. I think they have 6 wins already, or be close to it at least. I think they have 5 with 2 to go.
Yeah, they're 5-6 right now.
Yeah, so they'd have an opportunity to get into a bowl game if they just not blow that massive lead to Montana State. But they've got a good offense. Defense is bad. Washington State's defense is bad. But the Cougars were just kind of, I feel like, on borrowed time also. They, lost to Boise State. Okay, got a crazy good win against Texas Tech. Crazy good win over Washington early on. Fortunate in that Washington game. But you barely got by against San Diego State. You didn't look great against Utah State. If Utah State had just been a little bit better, he would have probably been a lot closer. So, look, I don't think he needs to be fired. This was a rough time for Washington State and Oregon State for the Cougars to be playing as well as they have this season. I think is a testament to his coaching and what he's done to keep his team motivated. The Cougars were never going to the playoff. Even if they had gone undefeated, they weren't going to the playoff. Neither was Oregon State if they'd done the same. So in this kind of tumultuous year for the program with the disintegration of the Pac-12, to maybe be on track to win 10 games, I know it's against a weaker schedule, but whether you go 10-2 or 11-1 this year, Tim, you're not going to a much better bowl game because you're not going to the playoff. So I really, in the grand scheme of things, don't think it matters too much. I mean, you want to win your football games, but do I think he needs to be fired? No. He's had some relatively decent success during his time with the Cougars. It's not an easy place to win, not an easy place to recruit. We'll see what happens over the next few years, but I wouldn't blow it out of proportion after one loss to New Mexico State or two to Mexico. Excuse me.
I'm not a huge Jake Dicker enthusiast, but he's not going to be fired for winning 9+ games this season. And Washington State, their athletic department's kind of in a tricky situation right now, so they're not going to pull the trigger anyways. But it's going to take a lot more of a questionable season for them to ever consider firing Jake. I don't think he's going to be fired or needs to be fired right now.
Yeah, no, I would fully agree with that 100%. And a lot of it's going to come down to how he does next year. A lot of it's going to come down to how he fares in the future. What does the future for Washington State football hold? I know they're kind of rebuilding the Pac-12 a little bit, but it's not going to be that strong of a conference. So in that conference, the Cougars should still be a perennial title contender at that point. But again, for Washington State to keep winning 8-9 games a year, flirt with that new Pac-12 title every now and then, which I think they can do, that should be expected. I think he can still be the guy to do that, personally. Let's see. Only a couple more questions. It was kind of a quiet night in the chat tonight. Let's see here. I saw one that I'll come back to kind of close things out. We'll do.
I see a comment here. This person says, sure, the best teams to make a run in the playoff, a bunch of 3-loss teams. Pretty close to it. Yeah, that's actually the case because they're the most talented teams and they have the best depth and they are going to be the teams that have the most NFL talent, and the teams that have the most NFL talent normally end up winning the national championship. So yes, the answer is yes to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best way to look at that is, I mean, you're right. I mean, great example here would be, and I like Indiana a lot. Like, they're playing really, really good football, right? But like Indiana's undefeated, they're 10-0. Let's even go with not even 3-loss team all the way, but would you favor on a neutral site right now? Indiana's 10-0. Are you favoring Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, and Tennessee over Indiana right now?
Absolutely. I'm going to be favoring them by at least
Exactly.
10 points, 11 points. Yeah.
Exactly. So there you go. That answers the question, right? So yes, Indiana's got the better record. They are a good football team. But if they face all those teams I just mentioned have at least 2 losses. Bama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee. I would favor all those SEC teams over Indiana. Again, by at least a touchdown, if not more. If Indiana were to face one of them in the first round of the playoff, especially at their house in Tuscaloosa, in Athens, it could get ugly fast, possibly. So even though, one of those teams has 3 losses, Indiana's only got 1 or 0, or whatever, they're still going to win. I mean, Connor put it best the other day, earlier. I mean, I know they were slightly favored, but BYU was undefeated, and we're only like 2.5-point favorites at home against a 3-6 Kansas team. So again, record isn't everything. So to say, a 3-loss team, or they're the most likely to make the run. Yeah, they probably are. Yeah, you would still give preference to your undefeated teams like Oregon and Ohio State and Texas. Those teams, yes, are going to be the more likely teams to make a run to the title. But it's like March Madness. Which team in the first round do I think could make that big run? Probably a team that has 2 or 3 losses from the SEC or the Big Ten, more than likely.
Yeah. When are we ever going to see a Big 12 champion, a Big 12 national champion, or an ACC national champion?
The ACC's best shot is like right now with Miami. If they want to get in, that Miami's got to be the one to do it.
Yeah, and like, when are we ever going to see like a nationally top 10-ish roster for one of those teams? Like, I think Miami's kind of close to it from a power rating standpoint. But yeah, I don't know how many times we're going to see a nationally top 10 or top 12-ish roster from one of those 2 conferences in the near future.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree there. Last question here tonight before we call tonight here, hitting a little over the hour mark. It's been a great night with all of you. Our man Brandon, got to ask him. Aside from Indiana, who in the rankings is on fraud watch? I'm not even saying Indiana's. I'm really not saying Indiana's a fraud by any means. They're still a good football team. But Connor, I'll let you take this one first. Who's on fraud watch in the top 25 right now?
You want to guess where I'm going to go? I bet you can steal the answer out of my mouth.
I mean, well, here's the question here. Do you say all of the rankings, or do you say like within the top 15?
Well, top 15, that's still an easy choice for me. Yeah. I'm going to go BYU.
Yeah, BYU easily for you. I would agree with BYU. And then if you're going to do the entire rankings, I say Missouri as well.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And you know what? I know they're undefeated. We're going to find out more this Saturday. I wouldn't be shocked if they lost. Maybe not quite as bad, but sort of similar to how Navy lost to Notre Dame. I'm interested to see how good Army is.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I love this Army team. I really do. They're really good. And I've always thought they're better than Navy. I said that earlier. But Notre Dame is playing really good football right now. Since that Northern Illinois loss, I know it was a bad loss. They've played really good football. I know their schedule hasn't been that tough, but it's been good enough. They're playing great ball, and their defense has been outstanding. And they always fare well against those option teams. We saw how bad it was for Navy. We saw how bad Tulane beat Navy. Honestly, for me, I'm not a fan of moral victories. I'm not at all. But if Army keeps this game within 14 points against Notre Dame, that's a very big statement, in my opinion.
Yes, I agree. Also, I've been seeing some tweets that are saying this year's Arizona State and BYU kind of breakthrough teams are similar to what West Virginia was last season.
Yeah,
and I kind of agree with that, because how many studs, how many difference makers are there on those 2 teams? I think Cam Skattebo is great for Arizona State. He's a difference maker. He's an NFL draft pick. How many? Maybe Sam Levitt in the future becomes something really good. But Like, how many like difference makers are there on those two teams? Because how many difference makers were on West Virginia's roster last year?
Oh, plenty. I felt like.
Really?
I mean, to an extent. I mean, they had their running back core with what was it? It was White and Donaldson, and then Garrett. I mean, their offense was fine. Their offense was great. Defensively, maybe not so much, but their offense was really good. And the funny thing is, they brought all those guys back, and they're still struggling.
I guess that's true. I think, yeah, that's a good point. Their offensive line and running back rooms were pretty good, but it's not like what TCU and Washington had the last couple of years. Not saying that TCU and Washington were elite teams, like top 5 teams. They were not, but they were like, top 15-ish, between 10 and 15 power rating wise. And they had 7, 8 NFL draft picks. It's not like they were loaded from top to bottom, because their third string players were not half as good as what Alabama's or Ohio State's third string players are. But they still had some difference makers, at least a handful of difference makers at the top of their depth chart that could actually stand out and make plays. They were all American type guys. BYU and Arizona State this year, I mean, they have a couple. I think his name escapes me. I like one of the BYU linebackers. His name escapes me, but he was a transfer this year. He transferred up, I believe, from the FCS. Coaching staff loved him coming into the year, and he's stood out this year. I think Cam Scatabo is a great running back for Arizona State, but it's not like you're looking at these teams like, wow, that's a 3rd round draft pick, that's a 4th round pick, that's a 5th round. You don't really see that. And that's kind of like what West Virginia was last year. I know they had a couple of guys on the offensive line, one center, I believe, who was a top 2 or 3 round NFL draft pick. The running back room is pretty good. The offensive line is still pretty good, but it's not like there's a ton of difference makers on the roster.
Yeah, no, I would fully agree with that, and that's typically the case with these type of teams. These teams that are, once in a blue moon, they had this breakout season, but they're not your perennial conference title contenders. Not one of the top dogs in the conference, not one of the top dogs in all of college football. Every now and then they have a breakthrough year because they have a handful of players that are your elite talent or your star players, but then after a year or two, they go right back down to what we expected them to be, what they traditionally are.
Right.
You hit that there. So with that, everyone, we'll call this a night. An excellent conversation, and as always, won't be the last time that we have Connor on. As a matter of fact, as we wrap up, Connor's going to be taking over for the next couple of weeks. So starting on Monday. So I'll be with you for the remainder of this week. And then Connor is going to get you guys through rivalry week, and he's going to get you through conference championship week. So 2 of the biggest weekends of the year. He's going to be hosting the channel prediction videos, just like we always do. Those subscribe to the Expert Picks, we'll be getting those as well. So you're in great hands. You're in great hands with Connor. If you've enjoyed his analysis, not just tonight, but every other time in the past that we've had him on, you're going to get 10 times more of it starting on Monday. So Connor, we're excited to have you on, man, and we're excited to have you taken over, and looking forward to seeing what you got.
I appreciate that opportunity. Hopefully I can be half as good as what you are on this channel.
Man, well, you're not the encyclopedia for nothing, man. The name is fitting. The name is fitting. So it's going to be great. We're looking forward to it. But guys, that's going to do it from us here tonight on a Tuesday night live stream. Week 13 playoff rankings are out for the most part. Connor and I agree with them. We're not the worst set of rankings in the world. A couple things we changed, sure, but it's not horrible. Not horrible. Now, of course, these are going to change drastically over the next couple of weeks. We're only a few weeks out. 3 weeks from Sunday will be Selection Sunday. No, wait, 2 weeks from Sunday will be Selection Sunday, I believe. Right. So it's going to be here before we know it, guys. It's going to be here before we know it. Then we launch into the playoffs and the bowl season, everything like that. Into the holiday season, it's the best time of the year, not just because of the holidays, but because of the football that we're going to have on deck as well. So with that, I want to give a shout out to everybody that was here tonight. Alex TV, Scotty B, our man Brandon Schrader, Tony Elliott, DM, of course, Double O'Neill, Robert, Jerry, always good to see you. UCF, I think I said Scotty B. I want to give him another shout out as well. Our good man Tim Watts, a resident Cougars fan over in Washington State. We appreciate him. Double O'Neill, everybody again that was watching either tonight or will be watching later on. We appreciate every single one of you. We thank you for stopping by here at the Gridiron Expert. And we look forward to having you not just for the rest of this week with our videos, but next week as well, as this playoff race continues to heat up. And once again, Connor will be leading you the rest of the way. So have a great night, everybody. And we'll see you next time right here on the Gridiron Expert.